been helping to set up a brand new first ever Hispanic Adventist group here in Champaign-Urbana, which has been a real great blessing for us, and we're hoping to help to evangelize more people, because we know we have a lot of Hispanic brothers and sisters who need to hear the word of God too. So yeah, forgive me, my voice may be dying because I just came from giving this sermon in Spanish. So I know since we don't have mics up, maybe if you want to move up closer, I'll try to speak as loud as I can, but if you can move up closer, I think that would also be helpful. But yeah, it's great to see you guys, and it's great to be in the house of the Lord. You ever stop to think what a wonderful gift that is that God has given to us, just a day, just to be and just to enjoy His presence, right? I don't know of any other God that does that with His people, right? All the other gods, they have, they have their rules, they have their things, but how many of those gods want to actually spend time with their people, right? Yeah, so I'm so glad that I'm Christian and I'm an Adventist, and we know the one true and only God. So today we're going to talk about a story that probably a lot of you know, but I'm hoping that through this story we can find an application to our lives. So today I want to talk about Samson. How many of you have heard the story of Samson?
Yeah.
All of you guys, pretty much? How about the kids? Kuyani, do you know the story of Samson? Yeah, that's great. So yeah, Samson is a very famous personality in the Bible. Why? Why was he so famous for? His strength, right? Everyone knows him as, like, you'll see pictures in kids' books of like this huge muscular guy, tearing down stuff because he's so strong. And his story is really, really memorable, right? For those moments when he was super strong and he did all these amazing things. But when I look back on it, I also thought it was a memorable story because of what it might have been. So I know this is a quote, I don't really remember who it's from, but it said that the saddest words of tongue and pen are the words "it might have been," meaning unrealized potential.
Yes.
And when I look at the story of Samson, I see a lot of that. And so we're going to go through the story of Samson and see what that is. So we can find the story of Samson starting in Judges chapter 13. If you all want to follow me in your Bibles, you're more than welcome. So Judges chapter 13 is where it talks about Samson. So this is the time in Israel before the King David, before all those kings came up, when Israel was already settled in the promised land, but they didn't have a ruler. And instead, judges were coming up, one after another to rule Israel and just kind of, keep the peace. But unfortunately, Israel kept falling into this bad cycle where they'd follow God while they had a good judge leading them. But in between times, they would go back to their old ways. They would go back to worshiping other gods. And because of that, God couldn't keep blessing them. And they would end up being conquered by the other nations that were around them. And so when we start off Judges chapter 13, you can see that they're back in this cycle again. It says, "Again the Israelites did evil in the Lord's sight, so the Lord handed them over to the Philistines, who oppressed them for 40 years. And in those days a man named Manoah from the tribe of Dan lived in the town of Zorah. His wife was unable to become pregnant, and they had no children. The angel of the Lord appeared to Manoah's wife and said, 'Even though you have been unable to have children, you will soon become pregnant and give birth to a son. So be careful. You must not drink wine or any other alcoholic drink, nor eat any forbidden food. You will become pregnant and give birth to a son, and his hair must never be cut, for he will be dedicated to God as a Nazirite from birth. He will begin to rescue Israel from the Philistines.' The woman ran and told her husband, 'A man of God appeared to me. He looked like one of God's angels angels, terrifying to see. I didn't ask where he was from, and he didn't tell me his name. But he told me, you will become pregnant and give birth to a son. You must not drink wine or any other alcoholic drink, nor eat any forbidden food, for your son will be dedicated to God as a Nazarite from the moment of his birth until the day of his death. Then Manoah prayed to the Lord, saying, Lord, please let the man of God come back to us again and give us more instructions about this son who is to be born. And God answered Manoah's prayer. And the angel of God appeared once again to his wife as she was sitting in the field. But her husband Manoah was not with her. So she quickly ran and told her husband, the man who appeared to me the other day is here again. Manoah ran back with his wife and asked, are you the man who spoke to my wife the other day? Yes, he replied, I am. So Manoah asked him, when your words come true, what kind of rules should cover the boy's life and work? And the angel of the Lord replied, be sure your wife follows instructions I gave her. She must not eat grapes or raisins, drink wine or any alcoholic drink, or any forbidden food. So we can see here that Samson was born into a really special home. God can use anybody, right? When we look through the story of Judges, we see a lot of examples of some judges with interesting family backgrounds, right? In fact, just a few chapters back, you can read about Jephthah, a judge who literally was the son of a prostitute, was rejected by his family, and lived out in the wilderness with a gang until his people called him back and he was a judge of Israel, right? So God can use anybody, no matter what the background. But you can see that Samson was given a lot of advantages even before he was born, right? Because he was born to a family with a mother and father who really had faith in God, right? You can see like the first words that Manoah said when he came to talk to the angel says, when your words come true, how should we take care of this boy, right? She knew, even though his wife had had no kids until now, it didn't look like she was able to have kids, he already believed that this boy was going to come. And because of that, he asked, like, how are we going to take care of him? So they knew that they're going to raise up this very special boy, and they wanted to raise him up in the best possible way so that he could complete his mission. And that's the second thing Samson grew up with having, right, from his birth. He had a mission. What was Samson's mission? We read it here in verse 5, I believe. Sorry, what's that?
Deliver them from the Philistines.
Right. So he was basically born to be a deliverer from the Philistines. It says here, he will begin to rescue Israel from the Philistines. So you can see that there were a lot of instructions about what he was supposed to eat, that he was never supposed to cut his hair. All these things were part of the vow of being a Nazarite, right? And you can find descriptions of that in Numbers. But the interesting thing about the vow of being a Nazarite is that it wasn't just like a thing that you just did, right? You don't just go and, let your hair grow long and not stay away from alcohol. It was meant to go along with a vow that you made to God, right? And those external things, like the not eating wine or cutting of the hair, was kind of like a sign, like an outward sign of that devotion or that vow that you made to God, right? So all those outward things, like his letting his hair grow long, was supposed to remind him of what his mission was, which was to rescue Israel from the Philistines, right? So he grew up with a faithful and loving home, he grew up with a mission, and he also grew up with the Spirit of God and his blessing. If you skip forward to verse 24 and 25, it talks about when Samson was actually born. And it says, when her son was born, she named him Samson. And the Lord blessed him as he grew up. And the Spirit of the Lord began to stir him while he lived in Mahanadan, which is located between the towns of Zorah and Eshtaol. So you can see that, that as he grew, God was with him and blessing him throughout his development, right? When you read through that story, it sounds so much like the story of John the Baptist, right? Where a barren woman was to give birth to a son. And even the story of Jesus, right? If you think about when Jesus was around 12 years old, they said he kept growing and increasing in grace with God and with men, right? So the story of Samson was beginning to look like one of those great men of the Bible, right? But something happened. We don't remember Samson as the great deliverer of Israel. Unfortunately, we remember him because of his weaknesses. And that's what you start to see in the very next verse, in Judges chapter 14, verse 1. One day when Samson was in Timnah, one of the Philistine women caught his eye. When he returned home, he told his father and mother, "A young Philistine woman in Timnah caught my eye. I want to marry her. Get her for me." So he's very direct there. It's like, I want her. Get her for me. His father and mother were like, "Hey, aren't there any other woman like in all of Israel that you could marry?" But he's like, he told his father, "Get her for me. She looks good to me." So you can see that Samson's weakness was his eyes. He had an eye for the ladies. And unfortunately, all the ladies that he liked literally were Philistines. And it was obviously a huge distraction for his mission. What was his mission again? To deliver Israel from the Philistines. So if your mission is to deliver Israel from the Philistines, would you expect your first step is to marry a Philistine woman?
No.
No, that's not what you would do at all, right, if that was your mission. So you can see that he forgot his mission because he was distracted by his weaknesses, right? And so, unfortunately, this wasn't the only time, right? So he married this woman from Timnah. It became a whole hullabaloo because he tried to show off to the young men of Philistines, and then they showed him up by coercing his poor wife into telling them the answer to his riddle. And then he came down and killed 30 men because of that. And then he basically, one sin led to another, right? First he fell in love with this woman he shouldn't fall in love with. Then he got mixed up with the Philistines, and he got angry, right? He sort of raged out on them and killed a lot of them. And then it kept on going. You can read the whole chapter 15. It's just kind of a back and forth of revenge, right? Because first Samson tries to go and be with his wife again, but his father said, "No, I actually already gave her away to another man." And so like he was upset, and so he went and burned down all of the Philistines' crops. And the Philistines got mad because their crops are all burned down. It's like, what happened? And then they killed Samson's father-in-law and his wife, the Philistines. And then because of that, Samson went back in and killed more of them, and it's just kind of a back and forth of revenge and killing and just bad things happening. So basically one sin just kept leading to another and another. So you can see once you let one weakness get to you, it opens the door to a whole lot of other things to come after, unfortunately. So this just kept on going through, the woman of Timnah, and of course she wasn't the only one. There was also a prostitute of Gaza in Judges chapter 16, verse 1. He went all the way to the town of Gaza to sleep with a prostitute. And I didn't know this until I looked up in a map, but Gaza was really deep into Philistine territory, so for some reason he was way deep in there, and he decided to do this, and the Philistines surrounded him, but he was able to escape because the Spirit of God was still with him. Even with all of these weaknesses and with all of these mistakes, he kept, being saved because the Spirit of God was still with him and showed him mercy by giving him strength when he needed it, right? In this case, he actually, what he did to escape from that town of Gaza was he actually ripped open the doors of the town. So not like the doors of any old house. This was the whole town had a huge, gate that was barred shut every night. And what he did was just rip the whole thing off and carried it on his shoulders all the way to Hebron. So when you hear that, you don't really get the context, but when you look at a map, you can see that Gaza is way down by the ocean, and Hebron is 25 miles up the mountain. So he was able to carry that heavy thing all the way up the hill for 25 miles. So God definitely blessed him with supernatural strength even after his sins of falling in love again with another woman. And finally, of course, is the woman that we all know, is Delilah. So it's after that story about Samson and the gate, it says that sometime later, Samson fell in love with a woman named Delilah who lived in the valley of Sorek. the rulers of the Philistines went to her and said, "Entice Samson to tell you what makes him so strong and how he can be overpowered and tied up securely. Then each of us will give you 1,100 pieces of silver." So Delilah said to Samson, "Please tell me what makes you so strong and what it would take to tie you up securely." So Delilah was an interesting character. So at least with the first wife that he had, she kind of betrayed him because she was being coerced by the Philistines, saying, "Hey, we're going to kill you if you don't tell us something about Samson." But Delilah, she just wanted the money. So she cared more about the money than her relationship with Samson. So you can see here throughout this chapter, she asked him over and over again, "Tell me what it would take to tie you up and secure you." And Samson would give her an answer. The first time he answered, "If I were tied up with 7 new bowstrings that had not yet been dried, I will become as weak as anyone else." So Delilah did that. The Philistine rulers gave her 7 new bowstrings, and she tied Samson up with him. And she hid the Philistines in her house. And then when he was all tied up, she would say, "Samson, the Philistines came to capture you." But God's strength came upon him again, and he snapped those strings, and he was able to get away. And then afterwards, Delilah told him, "You have been making fun of me and telling me lies. Now please tell me how you can be tied up securely." So I don't know, if you know that Samson already knows something is up, right? Like the first time it's like, well, maybe she's just curious, right? But now he saw that she had Philistines hidden. She actually went and did it. So like, why would you answer this again? But I don't know. Samson replied again, "If I were tied up with a brand new ropes that had never been used, then I would become as weak as anyone else." And so Delilah went and did that. She got the new ropes, she tied him up, and again she had the Philistines all lying in wait for him. But again, Samson was able to snap those ropes off his arm and get away. And then again, Delilah came back to him and said, "You have been making fun of me and telling me lies. Now tell me how you've been tied up securely." So 2 times already she's tried to get him, and he still is giving her an answer. He replied, "If you were to weave the 7 braids of my hair to the fabric of your loom and tighten it with a loom shuttle, then I would become as weak as anyone else." And so she did that. They tried to capture him. He got away again. So even though he knows what the consequences are, he keeps going back to her for some reason. And every time he seems to be getting a little bit closer. So you notice this last one, he actually mentioned his hair. Like, it's like, "Oh, you do something with my hair, then maybe it will work." But yeah, so Delilah kept at it, and for some reason he kept coming back to her. And it says, "Then Delilah pouted, 'How can you tell me I love you when you don't share your secrets with me? You've made fun of me 3 times now, and now you still haven't told me what makes you strong.' She tormented him with her nagging day after day until he was sick to death of it." She must have been really beautiful, because I don't know how you put up with that. But he stuck around, and then finally, Samson shared his secret with her. In other versions of the Bible, I like the NLT because it's really clear, but in other versions of the Bible it says he opened his heart to her, and he showed her his heart. And he said, "My hair has never been cut," he confessed, "for I was dedicated to God as a Nazirite from birth. If my head were shaved, my strength would leave me, and I would become as weak as anyone else." So you can see that Samson still kept the outer trappings of his vow, right? He had never in his whole life cut his hair. He probably, because it's not mentioned in the Bible, he probably never touched alcohol. He knew that those are the things he was supposed to do, because he had that, training since he was born. But he forgot the most important part, which was the mission that was supposed to go along with it, right? Mm-hmm. But he still kept that outer kind of sign, but he forgot what the meaning was. Delilah realized that he finally told her the truth, so she sent for the Philistine leaders. "Come back one more time, for he has finally told me a secret." So the Philistine rulers returned with the money in their hands. Delilah lulled Samson to sleep with his head in her lap. Then she called in a man to shave off the 7 locks of his hair. And in this way she began to bring him down, and his strength left him. Then she cried out, "Samson, the Philistines have come to capture you." When he woke up, he thought, "I will do as I had before and shake myself free." But he didn't realize that the Lord had left him. So the Philistines captured him and gouged out his eyes, and they took him to Gaza, where he was bound with bronze chains and forced to grind grain in the prison. So what was it about his hair? Was his hair magical? Did all his strength actually live in his hair? No, it wasn't about his hair. I think it really was what I mentioned, that he opened up his heart. He gave his heart to his weakness, right? Mm-hmm. How many times do us in our lives, we have something that we keep going back to, right? A weakness, a sin, something that we know is not really helping us in our lives, our spiritual lives, our walk with God, but we keep going back to it because it's just, something that we do, something that we like. We don't think it'll actually, harm us or anything. It's just, there. But the problem with letting yourself give in to your weaknesses is that your weaknesses will keep weakening you, right? So God is always ready to forgive you, no matter what your past, right? God is always ready to forgive you and to use you. It says, whenever you confess your sins and you come with sincere heart to God, he will take you back, right? And he will show you grace. Just like Samson, over and over again, he's doing all these things, sleeping with prostitutes, raging out, but still God was with him and gave him help when he needed it. But when he gave his heart away, then God couldn't help him anymore, right? So that's the risk we run when we keep going back to our weaknesses, to our sins that we kind of hold on to, because unfortunately, even the smallest thing, if you love that thing more than God, then it's become an idol to you, right? And then how do you love something more than God? It's if God is asking you, "Can I have this?" And you say, "No, I want to hold on to this," right? It can be the smallest thing, but if you hold on to it, it can grow and cause huge problems for you later. So you can see that one problem that Samson had also, which has probably led to all this happening, is that he wasn't consistently with God, right? The Bible only records 2 times when Samson talked to God. And both of those times were when he was at his lowest point and literally about to die. So in Judges 15, verse 18, it was after he did his famous save where he found a jawbone of a donkey and killed 1,000 men with it. And it was a great victory. But after that victory, Samson, it says here that Samson was now very thirsty, and he cried out to the Lord, "You have accomplished this great victory by the strength of your servant. Must I now die of thirst and fall again into the hands of the pagans?" So he cried out to God, and God answered. So God caused the water to gush out of the hole in the ground at Lehi, and Samson was revived as he drank. Then he named the place the spring of one who cried out, and is still in Lehi to this day. So after his victory, after he was tired and thirsty, he thought he was ready to die, that's when he reached out to God, right? And of course, the most famous example is Samson's last words. So when Samson was captured by the Philistines, now he's blind, now he's literally walking in circles the whole day, grinding grain. Finally, the Philistines brought him out because they had a big party celebrating their God. They said, "Our God has brought us victory over Samson. Let's bring Samson out so we can make fun of him." So there he was, blind, chained up, being made fun of by 3,000 men and women. But then was when he prayed to the Lord in 16 verse 28. Then Samson prayed to the Lord, "Sovereign Lord, remember me again. Oh God, please strengthen me just one more time. With one blow, let me pay back let me pay back the Philistines for the loss of my 2 eyes." Then Samson put his hands on 2 center pillars that held up the temple. Pushing against them with both hands, he prayed, "Let me die with the Philistines." And the temple crashed down on the Philistine rulers and on all the people. So he killed more people when he died than he had during his entire lifetime. So it was a good conclusion in a way to his life, right? Because we know that he repented at the very end, right? We know that he will be in heaven. You see him in the book of Hebrews, right? In the whole famous Faith Hall of Fame, right? So he was listed there as someone who had great victories with God's help. But how sad it was that his greatest victory was his death, right? Imagine if instead of having his great victory be his death, what if he had been consistently with God the whole time, right? What if instead of praying to God only when he thought he was about to die, what if he was praying to God every day and asking God, "God, how do you want me to lead your people? How do you want me to, get rid of these Philistines?" You could imagine that Samson could have been like Gideon, someone who the whole country of Israel rallied around, someone who used his strength for good and freed the country of Israel. It says that Samson, in between women, it says that Samson judged Israel for 20 years. But it says something a bit different. Other times in the book of Judges, you'll say that, oh, this judge ruled the land for so many years and the land was at peace, right? But when it talks about Samson, it says Samson judged Israel for 20 years during the period when the Philistines dominated the land. It could have been better, right? It could have been a time of peace. It could have been a time when the Philistines were no longer a problem if he had just been connected to God, right? So that's the sad part, but it's also a good example for us, right? Because we still have hope. We're still here on this earth, and we can make a difference, right? Just imagine, what would our church look like if we were consistently connected to our God, right? I mean, with Gio and I, we've been trying to read some more about, the books of Ellen White and all the cool, things that she did and said, and how much truth it has even for today. And it's really neat. But if you look at it, all the dates are 1869, 1889. We're talking about more than 100 years ago, right? 150 years almost. And we're still kind of leaning on that kind of as our reputation, oh, we're the church that has Ellen White, right? We have the spirit of prophecy. You hear that sometimes where preachers talk about, let's read in the spirit of prophecy, and they're talking about Ellen White, right? But I never really understood that, because spirit of prophecy really shouldn't be just Ellen White, right? When you read in the book of Jude, I think it is, that it says, "In the last days your sons and your daughters will prophesy, your old men will have visions." It's not just one lady, right? God didn't say, "Oh, I will send one special lady prophet, and she will have all these visions, and then we'll be done." When you read it, it's more of a movement, right? Of all these people coming together, hearing from God, and changing the world. What if our church was like that, right? What if our church was more consistent in evangelism, right? If you look back at the way, way beginnings of our church, when Jesus just left and with his disciples, right? There were 12 disciples with some more followers, 120 people. And because they were so on fire, they evangelized the world so fast, right? Peter, with one sermon, 3,000 people got baptized. And they traveled to Italy, to Rome. They evangelized someone who went down to Ethiopia. They spread all over the world in such a short amount of time because they had that fire, the spirit of prophecy within them, right? What if we had that fire today? Why are we just a little tiny church in this town of, I don't know, a few thousand people, right? Or I think about this a lot on campus, right? We are struggling to find other Adventist students. We have a little group now, maybe 10 or 12, but this campus has 50,000 people on it, right? Imagine if all of us were active and bringing more people in. How amazing that would be, right? What if our church was less focused on our outer trappings of Adventism and more on our mission, right? Because a lot of times we're like, oh yeah, we're the Adventists. We're the people who keep the Sabbath. We don't eat pork. We don't wear jewelry, etc., right? But those are just, why did God ask us to do those things? Why did God ask us to not eat pork, for example? It's unclean. It's not good for us. But why does God want us to have good health? Bodies are a temple of God, right? And when we have a strong temple, a strong body, that means we're able to do things, right? Because if we're weak, we're like sick all the time, how can we go out and evangelize people, right? So Gio and I have been reading in the councils on diet and food, and it's really cool. There are all the principles of health in there, but she keeps going back to saying the health ministry is not just a ministry by itself. It's supposed to be a ministry that works arm in arm with the three angels' messages, right? It's a ministry that's supposed to help us in our last days get that final push, that final strength we need to reach the world. Why do we keep the Sabbath? So we have spent time with God, right? So we have rest from our work, and so that we can be a witness to others to help them enter into that rest, right? So a lot of times I think we focus a little bit too much on being Adventist, and we forgot our mission as an Adventist. What is our mission? It's right there in our name, right? What does Adventist mean? The second coming of Christ, right? We know that God is coming soon. It could be any day now. Are we really living like it could be tomorrow? If you knew for a fact, we don't, of course, but if you knew for a fact that Jesus was coming next Sabbath, how would you live this week? Would you still live it the way you've been living last week? Probably not. I know I wouldn't. I would be, I don't know. I don't know what I would do, but I definitely wouldn't live it the way I lived last week. Oh, Lord, forgive me. And yeah, so that's how it all starts, right? We can say all these things about our church, but really it's about our lives. Individually, right? What would our lives look like if we were consistently connected to God's power? What weaknesses are we holding on to that are holding us back, right? I know that I have some weaknesses that I've been holding on to that's been keeping me from living the life that I should. So why don't I let go of them, right? Sometimes we unfortunately love our weaknesses more than we love God, even though they keep hurting us. Just like the Philistine women were hurting Samson. Imagine how far you could go if you let all those things behind, right? Just like it says in Hebrews chapter 12, putting down everything that's weighing us down, putting back the sin that's dragging us down, we move forward, right? So remember, what is your mission? Right? What is our mission? Collectively, our mission, of course, is to reach the world for Christ and to share his love. What that looks like for every one of us is obviously going to be different, but that's our general mission. And let's think about how we could get there, right? Are we actually making steps towards our mission? One surprising passage that I read recently from the Councils on Diet and Foods was she was describing sort of like what it will be like in heaven, right? We'll be before the white throne of judgment. We've made it, right? But then when we're there, a lot of things will be revealed. We'll see our lives kind of played back, and we'll see also what our lives could have been, right? Through different choices. And it says there that people there will be crying, wishing they could live their lives over again because they see how much more they could have done. So I guess my final message is don't set yourself up for regret in heaven, right? Don't be like, I'm saved, but I'm gonna, like I'm at the very last minute, I'll just pray, I'll be forgiven, I'll come back to God. Why not come to God now, right? why not come to God every day and say, God, what do you want me to do? How do you want me to live this day? Help me live this day so I can have the most impact for you in my job, in my home, wherever I am, Lord. God, you put me on this world for a purpose, for a mission. Help me to do the most that I can with your strength. That way, when we get to heaven, we'll look back and we'll see the lives that we impacted instead of all the missed opportunities. When we get to heaven, instead of having to cry for all those people we lost along the way, we'll be able to rejoice because we'll have our friends, our co-workers, everyone there with us to celebrate. And so, yeah, with that, let's pray together, shall we? Dear God, you've put us here, your Park Avenue family, you put us here for a purpose, for a mission, dear Lord. Lord, you know what the mission is for every single one of these people here in this room. You know, dear Lord, what is my mission. Lord, please help us to realize what our mission is and to never forget it. Lord, help us to live every day according to your mission, what you want us to do. Lord, help us to live in such a way that when you come again, we'll be ready to be with you and to bring others along with us. Thank you so much for giving us this day, this time. And let whatever we learn today stay with us, not just for this day, but throughout every day, dear Lord. Thank you, God, for your love, your mercy, and your compassion. Thank you for forgiving us when we don't deserve it. Please be with us now and always. In Jesus' name I pray, amen.